Hey guys, Dave here from Computer Hobbyists. I'm with ogStevieStrow. We're at the Cocoa Fest in Elk Grove, Illinois. So Stevie, how'd you get into the color computer?
Of course, now you're putting me on the spot, right? So it was 1981. I'll tell you when I got it. I'll have to backpedal from the 1981. I was about 14 years old. I wanted a computer because my friends had Atari 2600s, video game systems, things like that, and I was like, all right, well, I could get a video game system. And this was the reality of it, was that if I had bought an Atari, I would have had to have paid for every cartridge that I owned, so my software library would have been very limited based on my financial means. But I knew somehow if I had a computer that you could have a friend that you copy a game, so you could get more games on a computer through the friend network than you could by the financial transaction of having to buy the hard cartridges. So part of that was financially motivated. Part of it too was the one thing a computer could do at that time that a console, and Atari was pretty much the only console there was, so you had an Atari either video game system or an Atari computer, but the video game systems were really good for just your 2D four-directional games, but the computers also had the text adventure games, and I loved the idea of the text adventure, because prior to that I was playing with my friends who were like 12 years old. We used to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so the idea of using your imagination to describe your surroundings and to role play, to me, text adventure was kind of like a solo version of that, because you're still using your mind to imagine where you are. And so it was a way to do a one-player kind of Dungeons and Dragons type situation. So I liked the idea of the text adventure. I liked the idea of having games similar to what I could get on an Atari, and then the added benefit of being able to get copies of software from your friends. And so, yeah, the wanting to play video games is why I bought a computer.
Yep.
Because there was all new stuff back then.
Yeah, when I was a kid I wanted a computer, so my mom took me to some computer class at Radio Shack. They taught me how to program in Logo, and after that I decided I wanted a computer. I didn't know what to get, so I ended up getting a Radio Shack color computer too with 64 kilobytes of memory.
Wow.
The reason I got it is because that's the only computer I knew how to use.
Yeah.
My friend had a VIC-20. I didn't like it that much though, even though the VIC-20 is actually not a bad computer, but at the time I didn't like it. So I learned quite a bit from the color computer. Like I had I think it was Mammoth Beacon typing tutor, and when I was like 10 years old, I mean I could type like 30 words a minute, which was pretty damn good for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think the first game I got was Monster Maze, and then my uncle for Christmas bought me Stellar Lifeline. That was probably one of my favorite games for the Coco.
Okay.
And then my favorite game of all was one that was on a cassette tape. It was called Puyin.
Puyin. Yeah.
I haven't played it in years, so I watched your video about how to run the emulator on your computer. I can't figure out how to get the tapes to run, though, so if you ever want to do a new video, you might want to do one that shows how to run tapes.
Everything you can get on disk image now. So
okay.
To this day, I'm not sure how I'd load a tape on an emulator. But you can get everything that was on tape or cartridge, you can also get on disk. So you can download everything.
I didn't know. So you can just run it as a disk then?
Yeah. So running disks on emulators to me is the only way I do anything, because that's the way I know. Not that it's the best way, it's the way I know how to do it. So I load a disk, I load the software. Puyin was cool. Puyin had cool graphics, cool music. That was weird because that one only sold on cassette. Tandy did some weird things. But talking about programming, like when I got my color computer, I had the first model color computer, the silver one, had 4K of memory. No, I had 6. I got it the second year. In 1980, it had 4K. 1981, for the same price, for the $400 base model, it had 16K. But it had 16K standard basic, not even the extended basic. And I just taught myself how to program. I was making simple little games. And the books, do you remember the books that came with it?
Yeah, I got one actually in my bag. I bought for $5 here.
Getting started with Color Basic. Those books were amazing, because I had never touched a computer. I'd never programmed before, but it took a kid who was 14 years old who did not like math, who I was not a good student by any means, but I was able to read that book and teach myself through that book the programming language. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a programmer until I went to college for it and realized that's not for me. But no, but that was a fringe benefit. Was I got it to play games. I learned how to program. I started making my own games, and and going to computer clubs and all that kind of stuff. And it was an exciting time back then. So
one thing I regret about when I had the color computer too is that there was nice magazines related to that computer. I think one was Rainbow something.
Oh yeah.
And another one, I can't remember what it was called, but I didn't even know these magazines existed. If I would have known about them, if they would have sold them at Radio Shack, I would have bought a copy of each every month if I would have known they existed.
I don't know how we learned anything before the internet, to be honest with you. I mean, there's things, we were able to do things before GPS and internet. I don't know how we did it, but yeah, so somehow I found out about the Rainbow. I don't think I ever subscribed to Rainbow. I don't remember, but I remember buying occasional Rainbows. So somehow we found out. Maybe it was through a computer club. One of the reasons why I got the color computer as well was because of Radio Shack. So even before computers came out, or like the first TRS-80, the black and white one, the one that we now call the Model 1. It was just called the TRS-80.
Yeah.
So I remember going by my neighborhood Radio Shack all the time, and it was just a cool place to hang out because they had stereos, they had TVs, they had hi-fi. And then when that first computer, I remember looking at the black and white TRS-80 and playing Dancing Devil and some of those space games and stuff. And that was like, I had never seen a home computer before. So even to see that system was really cool. So I was that kid that hung out at Radio Shack forever. And so, and I and that's just that's one of the reasons why I went with the Coco. It's because I had a relationship with my local Radio Shack store. They would let the kids hang out there and play. And think about that. Think about, like, where did you buy an Atari? In Sears? Right? Could you have hung out in a Sears store and taught yourself how to program on the Atari computer
they
in
probably
the store?
throw you out,
right? And they'd go away, kid, you bother me, right? So, but the managers would let the kids hang out and play with the computers. And so I was already learning how to use a computer before I could even afford to even conceive on affording one, So that was a smart move on Radio Shack to let people play with the toys and not kick them out of the store, because I ended up being a customer. I later on got hired, became a salesperson, and I sold the heck out of Cocos and Tandy 1000s. So I was in the right place at the right time, and Radio Shack was just that corner place that allowed me to experience this world of home computing. And I felt a loyalty to my store and to my store managers and stuff because they let me live there as a kid and play with things without having to pay for them.
So did you used to go to like the different newspapers and magazines and take the basic clippings out and type them in? I used to do a lot of that when I was a kid.
I didn't do a lot of that because I was already making my own stuff.
Gotcha.
So I hear a lot of people who have fond memories of that, and for whatever reason, I was just able to figure out, not that my stuff was the greatest stuff in the world, but I had enough of a clue to make things. So I was more focused on just how can I imagine something, how can I create something, how can I make it, how can I try to achieve my vision with my limited skills and the limited power of BASIC. So I was very busy just where everything was a proof of concept. Oh, I just read this chapter, here's a command on how to make sound, let's do some demos with sound. Here's the, and so as you learn as you get a new skill in your tool bag, and then you put those skills, and as you keep adding those, then you keep working on newer, bigger programs. So I never had a shortage of ideas on things to do, but I never did anybody else's stuff. I always just worked on my own stuff.
Gotcha.
That's just how it worked out for whatever reason. But for the entire decade of the 80s, I was typing on the Coco in BASIC. For 10 years, I did nothing but write in BASIC. In the 90s, I spent 10 years typing in Quick BASIC, which was, so basically, as you probably know, the BASIC and the color computer is made by Microsoft. That version of BASIC, our extended BASIC, would be the precursor to the BASIC for MS-DOS. And then they had a version called Quick BASIC, which was a compiler. So you could type up BASIC code in an editor, compile it into an exe file that you could run.
Oh, that's awesome! So it doesn't have to translate when you run it.
So
that's awesome.
I spent a decade of '80s writing BASIC code on the Coco. I spent the decade of the 90s writing BASIC code on MS-DOS-based systems in Quick BASIC, and that's where I made a game that I have called Cosmic Aliens. I did that. I took all my Coco skills and did that. So I spent like 20 years programming in BASIC, just because it was fun. It was a hobby, and I just kept trying to learn things and do things. But yeah, it was cool. And then, ironically, I don't program for a living and whatever, So
yeah, I like BASIC. What I wish I would have learned though was assembly. Though when I was young, I didn't know assembly existed. Though that's why I didn't learn it. I didn't know there was such a thing. I thought everything was. I figured everything was done in BASIC, but I did notice that the file names or extensions were different,
Right,
and I didn't know why.
Right. You know,
but
the basic files were .bas,
Yeah.
and those were .bin for binary. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, I wish I learned it, and even now I'm trying to make the time to learn it. We have so many resources now. We have so many people that will help with that. There's tutorials, there's YouTube, so yeah, there's no excuse not to now than it's investing the time. There's so many ways to do it.
I ended up learning assembly when I was in school, in college. We just had one class in assembly. I went to school for computer engineering. I work as a software engineer now. I wish we would have had more classes in assembly, though, because, I mean, just one class is just kind of like dipping your feet. And
Right. And that's the thing, too. Like, I didn't understand then, because that's why I went to college. Because I knew from being a kid that if you wrote a game in BASIC, it was going to be slow, and it sucked. But the games that were written in machine language were the fast ones.
Right.
And so I thought if I went to college, they were going to teach me machine language. They were going to teach me assembly. I didn't realize that assembly is processor specific. I thought assembly was kind of like BASIC, right? If you learn BASIC, you can run BASIC on anything. If you learned assembly, but there's 6809 assembly, which is for the processor for the Coco. There's 6502 assembly. There's 808. So assembly is based on the processor you're writing it for.
Right.
I had no clue about that. So when I went to college to learn programming, I thought, okay, now I'm finally going to learn assembly. Now I can finally make the games the way I want to make them, and they'll be fast. And I'm like, you guys teach assembly? No, we don't teach assembly. I'm like, well, then why am I here? Yeah, I came here to learn how to make fast games because my basic games suck. Right, so that's selfishly, that's why I wanted to go to school, because I figured, I didn't realize that half the people who wrote software back then were teenagers. Because I was a teenager, but I only wrote in BASIC. It never occurred to me that I could have learned assembly then. It was just like, that was this thing up here. That's what grown-ups did. That's what the professionals did. I'm this dumb kid. I'm going to just do BASIC. It never occurred to me I could have learned assembly. It was too daunting. But a lot of the games that were written, we're finding out now these guys were 16 years old when they wrote these games in assembly back in the 80s. And
right.
I just thought, when I grow up, I'll learn assembly. Yeah. That was my dumb kid thinking about it, you know. And now I'm still growing up, and I haven't learned it either because life and laziness, right? So.
Yeah, when I was in college, we learned, in addition to the one assembly class, we had a bunch of classes in C and C++ and some in Java too. I don't use any of those languages anymore. I use C# mostly, C#, and then for the web stuff, HTML and Canvas and CSS and JavaScript.
I don't know any
stuff.
modern.
Yeah.
I know BASIC to this day. I know BASIC.
Okay.
It's the thing about BASIC is it's great because it's empowering because you can do a lot with it, but it's also a crutch because you can never get to another level if you don't, take off the training wheels. Let go of the water wings, right, and start to swim in the deep end. So, but the whole 90s, I was writing in BASIC because I could compile it. So I was able to accommodate for the slowness of the language by compiling it to get it to run, but I never still learned how to do it the right way, to do it in assembly. And now there's modern basics. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be working on a project in a modern version of Quick Basic. I'm writing a text adventure game engine, because that was kind of my roots. Text adventures is what got me interested in computers as well, so I'm going to be working on a text adventure engine. There's a program now called QB64. It's a free version of Quick Basic and runs on Windows, Mac, Linux. So I'm going to be working on a text adventure game engine that I'm going to be writing in Quick Basic. So still now, 40 years later, I'm still using that crutch of BASIC, but I can do it on a modern PC.
Right.
When you compile it and run it, it'll look like an MS-DOS program running on a modern machine. So it's still going to be a vintage program written in a vintage language, so kind of period correct. But that's still another crutch and excuse for me not to learn assembly. But one of these days, promise me, I've been saying this for 5-10 years now, one of these days I'm going to learn assembly. Right? So.
Yeah, the last Vintage Computer Festival, there was a guy handing out some handouts. He works as, I think, a high school teacher or something in
That's Evan Wright.
Computer class.
That's
and he's
Evan
doing
Wright.
the text engine thing with
He's
students.
doing it. He's doing it. It's like an Infocom one where you can write all the information. It takes it to XML and it'll create a runnable program on a TRS-80, a Z80, so it outputs a playable adventure game on a modern vintage systems. Yeah, he showed that project up here at Coco Fest a couple years ago, his adventure game thing. Yeah, that's kind of cool that he's made a lot of games for the Coco that are on cartridge now too, Flood It and Hunt the Wampus and a few things like that. So he's done some cool stuff. We got some really cool people in the community now making modern retro games on the hardware. and that's kind of cool to see new games on the old computer. You know what I mean? So, like right now at Cocoa Fest, our next presentation is going to be the game developers that are going to be talking for an hour. So the people who are making the new video games for the old color computer are going to be speaking at 1 o'clock. So, yeah.
You're doing a presentation this time too, right?
We're doing a live Cocoa Talk at 2 o'clock, so right
Cool.
after that. So, yeah. So, usually when we do Cocoa Talk, the people on the show are all virtual and the audience is all virtual. So this will be the first time where the people in the audience are all in the same room. So this will be probably our first ever live Cocoa Talk, where
Nice.
everybody's there. So, yeah, that should be interesting. And hopefully not a train wreck. Yeah, so.
Very nice. Did you ever use a Commodore 64?
No, I never owned one or used one. I had friends who had them. You knew the games were good. You know, the rivalries back then. Commodore's better than Atari. Atari's better than Apple. Everybody had their favorite machine. So I had friends who had everything. So I had friends who had Apples and Ataris and Commodores, and we would go to our friends' houses and play the games. I remember playing Rambo on the Commodore 64 and just being blown away. Like the graphics and the sound and the music. I'm like, oh my God, my color computer could never do this, right? So you were jealous of your friends who had the computers that could do better graphics and sound, right? So I'm familiar with them. I never owned one. I have one now, which I haven't even turned on because I got one and somebody said the power supply could possibly blow it up and make sure you have a good power supply. So I have a vintage the brown bread box C64. But I'm afraid to turn it on.
Yeah, one thing about the Commodore 64, I got one later after I had the Cocoa for, I don't know, 4 years or 5 years. I got a Commodore 64 because the prices finally went down. Originally, the Commodore 64 was like $599.99, but when I got it, it was like $150. So I was like, all right, I'll pick it up. Like you said, the games were fantastic and stuff, but the BASIC that was built into it was junk. You had to do all these... I can't remember the basic push and pops or
pokes and peeks.
Pokes and peeks, and stuff, and in order to do graphics.
And there's a story behind that too, which was in one of our books that was written about the history of the color computer. So that BASIC was also licensed from Microsoft, and it was licensed at a time during probably the VIC-20. So when they made the Commodore 64, Microsoft I think they bought it. They bought a blanket license to sell BASIC, flat rate price, right? Which was, they said that's the last time that Microsoft ever did that. So now Microsoft wants to sell you a license per ROM, right? So they want to charge you, $1 per chip or however many seats you use. So in order to keep the license they already paid for, they couldn't change the ROM.
Gotcha.
So all they basically did now is anything new that the C64 could do that the VIC-20 couldn't, you had to talk straight to the processor through peeking and poking.
Right.
They couldn't extend the language because that would have had to come from Microsoft and that would have cost them money. So that's why the C64 BASIC is all pokes and peeks, which is that's hand coding assembly. That's setting a piece of memory, a piece of value into a memory location. So that's basically byte by byte pushing stuff into memory processor. That's how you put a sprite on the screen and offset the locations of the sprites and move the graphics around. So it wasn't programmer friendly if you're a BASIC, the whole idea of BASIC is a user friendly language, an easy to use language. When you're poking and peeking, you might as well be assembling at that point because that's literally what you're doing. You're sticking byte values in memory locations.
Right.
So,
cool.
Yeah. Cool stuff. Cool history. So you need to come on our show. So whenever you put this interview on your YouTube channel, we will feature that, and then we'll have you come on and talk about it.
Sounds good.
Plug your channel, because I just saw on your channel, I was looking on my phone, that you were at VCF Midwest, which we were also at. A lot of us Cocoa guys were there too. But that was a good event, right?
Yeah, I
really
loved
good
it.
Event. But it was a blur. It's just like you're there for 2 days and it's over. It's like, wait, what just happened? Right? So it's just like there's so much to do at these events, and it's hard to see everybody and see everything, which I guess is a good problem.
Definitely.
And I noticed that you had a really good looking video, so I'm going to watch your video of that. I took a few videos with my phone, but I didn't produce or upload anything. But no, that's cool.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for
good,
the interview.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
Good talking
to you.
to you.
If you're still here later on, come join us for our live Cocoa Talk.
All right. Yeah.